Today we're going to be studying slopes and how to find the measure of a slope given 2 points. A slope is a number that measures the steepness of a line, usually denoted as a fraction or a whole number, abbreviated as m. Now the m that I use is in italics. You don't have to use italics. It's just the way I like to do it. A lot of mathematicians do that, a lot of them don't. Now behind me I have a line, and how do we measure the slope? Well, slope is measured by rise over run. Now rise, you can see, would be the y-axis, and run would be the x-axis. So rise over run would be the difference in y, that is how fast we're rising on the y-axis, over the run, which is how far we're moving to the left or the right on the x-axis. Now obviously if we're moving up, that's a positive direction. If we're moving down, that's a negative direction. And on the x-axis, if we're moving to the right, that's a positive direction, and to the left is a negative direction. We studied that the other day. So here we have our line, and we're going to want to pick 2 points where the lines on the grids come together. Here's one, right there, and here's another, right there. Okay, from the first point to the second point, we're going to descend 4. And did you hear me say descend? That doesn't sound like rise. It sounds like the opposite of rise. That's correct. The difference in y is going to be -4. Now from the point that we finished, how far are we going to run on the x-axis? We are going to move in a positive direction 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So our slope is going to be the difference of y, that's -4, over the difference in x, which is +6. And as you can see, we can reduce that to -2/3. And we like to get that negative out front. So there you go. That's the slope of that line. It's -2/3. Now you're thinking, how do I know which point to start at? It doesn't matter. Let's start at the second point. Well, if we start on the y-axis and we want to get to the other point, we're going to have to rise. And from that point, we need to run in a negative direction. So it's still rise over run. That is, it's still y over x. So that'd be +4 over -6. And as you can see, when we reduce that, it's going to be -2/3. So it doesn't matter which point you start at. Now I'm going to draw a flat line that runs parallel to the x-axis. That is to say, it never crosses the x-axis, but it crosses the y-axis at 3. And the value for y is always 3. And if you look at -6, it's going to have a value of 3. If you look at +5, it's going to have a value of 3 because it's running parallel to the x-axis. So for that line, we say that y equals +3, or y equals 3. We also say that that has a 0 slope. That is, if you calculate it out, it's going to be 0/5 or 0/6 or whatever you come up with. But 0 over whatever number is 0. Let's see what happens on the x-axis when we do that. Okay, this line goes through the x-axis at 3, and it runs parallel to the y-axis. That is to say, it will never penetrate y. There is no y-intercept. There's only an x-intercept. The x-intercept is 3, and the formula for this line will be x equals 3. There will be no y in this. And the slope for this line is no slope, not 0. 0 is not the same as no slope. This is a no slope or undefined. So you can say undefined or no slope, but that does not equal 0. So let's calculate the slope if they give us 2 points. Let's go back to the first line that we drew. And the first point that we looked at was -4 on the x-axis. If you count those spaces, it's -4. And on the y-axis, it's +3 going up in a positive direction. So it's -4, +3. And if you remember from our first lesson, the x is first and the y is second. Now remember, when we're measuring slope, it's the y that's first. That is to say, the y is on top and the x is on the bottom. But when you put the point numbers in parentheses, the x is first and the y is second. So let's look at the second point. Well, that point is +2 on the x-axis, going from here, 0 on the x-axis, it's going to be 1, 2. And on the y-axis, coming down from the x-axis, or following along the y-axis, it's -1. That is, we're descending. Okay, so that point is going to be 2, -1. And the formula for a slope is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1 equals m. That is, it equals slope. So they like to start with the second point and subtract the first point, but it doesn't matter. You can start with the first point and subtract the second. And why don't we do that? I'm going to get up so you can see that. And we are going to subtract the first y, which was +3. So let's take the second x. That was 2. And let's subtract -4. You can put that -4 in parentheses. That's what most people do. I don't see any need for that. It's -4. And when we come across negative, that's right, it's a positive. And so -1 minus 3 equals -4. And 2 plus 4 equals 6, which is what we came out with the first time. And we reduced that to -2 over 3, which is -2/3, which is our slope. So this is our last problem. And in this problem, for the first point, we're given the x value, but we're not given the y value. And for the second point, we're given the x and y value, and we're given the slope. So we have one variable, if you want to look at it that way, and let's solve for that. So the value for the second y is -1 minus the unknown value for the second y. And that will be over the second value for x minus the value for the first x. And that will equal slope. And we're given a value for slope. Well, we can't add 1 minus y, but we can add 5 minus 2. And that would be 3. And we can get rid of that 3 if we multiply the numerator times 3. And of course, whatever we do to the left side, we need to do to the right side. That will eliminate our denominator on the left side. And -3 times 3, that will be -9. And since we're not multiplying anything times the parentheses anymore, let's bring that out of the parentheses. And you can see this is starting to get easier to look at. Let's bring that -1 over to the other side by adding +1 to each side. Let's bring all that down. And -y equals -8. Let's multiply both sides by -1. -1 times -y is +y. And -8 times -1 is +8. And so The value for y in that first point is 8. And you need to do your homework and get better at this.